The sterile hum of the server racks, a symphony of unseen power, was the only constant companion in Alexander Sterling's world. He sat, not on a throne, but in a custom-designed ergonomic chair that cost more than most people's homes, positioned before a panoramic screen that stretched almost the entire length of his penthouse wall. The city, a glittering mosaic of ambition and struggle, lay sprawled beneath him, an ant farm he occasionally deigned to observe, but rarely to acknowledge. He, Alexander Sterling, the tech titan who had not merely built an empire, but sculpted an entirely new digital landscape, was its unseen sovereign. Yet he felt no dominion, only an immense, suffocating emptiness. This penthouse, a monument to his unimaginable wealth and meticulously curated isolation, was less a residence and more a gilded cage, a prison of his own making, where the guards were soundproofed walls and the ceaseless glow of his own screens. His days drifted, indistinguishable from one another, a monotonous current flowing through channels of data and pre-programmed schedules. The bespoke suits felt like a uniform for an office he never truly occupied. The gourmet meals tasted of ash, and the curated art on his walls, masterpieces collected at auctions with a mere flick of his wrist, held no beauty for his jaded eyes. Success, that elusive phantom other men chased with such desperate fervor, clung to him like a suffocating shroud, a burden heavier than any failure. It was hollow, utterly, profoundly hollow, a grand edifice built on the shifting sands of ambition without purpose. He remembered a time, long ago, when a nascent idea, a spark of innovation could ignite a fire within him, a thrill that pulsed through his veins. Now, even the groundbreaking advancements his company unveiled, the algorithms that redefined human connection and commerce, left him cold, untouched by their supposed impact. He saw the numbers climb, the market cap swell, the headlines scream his name, and felt nothing but a profound, almost disorienting disinterest. His mind, once a whirring engine of creative destruction, now processed information with a machine-like efficiency, devoid of any true human joy or intrinsic motivation. Each breath felt like an obligation, each sunrise merely a reminder of another day he had to endure. He was disconnected, not just from humanity, but from the very essence of being alive, a ghost haunting his own opulent existence. There were no unexpected turns in his meticulously organized life, no spontaneous impulses, no desires that weren't immediately catalogued and dismissed as inefficient or irrelevant. His world was a series of closed loops, flawlessly executed, endlessly repeating, each revolution bringing him closer to an unknown yet utterly predictable end. The silence of his penthouse was absolute, broken only by the whispers of his systems and the distant, muffled echoes of a world that existed purely outside his impenetrable bubble, a world he had long ago ceased to believe in, or perhaps to care for. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the screens finally went dark and the city beneath him softened into a blur of distant lights, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor would ripple through his carefully constructed indifference, a phantom ache for something he couldn't name, a silent question he refused to acknowledge. The question remained unacknowledged, buried beneath layers of carefully cultivated indifference, until one otherwise indistinguishable morning. Alexander's routine was a symphony of precision. each movement choreographed, each thought preordained. He woke to the pre-programmed ascent of his blackout blinds, revealing the muted pre-dawn grays of the city. His automated coffee machine hummed to life, a silent promise of regulated caffeine. He walked to the expansive windows of his penthouse, not for contemplation, but for a data-driven assessment of atmospheric conditions and traffic flow, information his algorithms would instantly integrate into his day's schedule. His gaze swept over the sprawling urban tapestry, a familiar, desaturated landscape. It was a world he navigated by proxy, through screens and proxies, rarely touching its gritty reality. He was preparing to turn from the window to engage with the glowing data streams that formed the backbone of his digital empire, when it happened. A jarring discord in the urban symphony. A violent, almost offensive splash of color on the stark utilitarian gray of the sidewalk below. It was an anomaly, a breach in the meticulously controlled visual field that usually greeted him. His eyes, accustomed to the muted palettes of steel and glass, registered it with a jolt that was almost physical. He leaned closer, a faint furrow appearing between his brows, an expression of mild annoyance, an involuntary response to a system error. It was a sun. Not a minimalist, abstract representation, but a child's sun. A bright, unashamedly yellow circle with radiating orange and red lines, rendered with an enthusiastic, if unsteady hand. It was simple, aggressively joyful, and utterly out of place. Alexander observed it for precisely 6 seconds, a duration far exceeding the allocated time for such irrelevant external stimuli. His logical mind immediately categorized it as childish ephemera, ephemeral, highly inefficient use of resources, chalk, time, public space, no discernible utility, a transient, meaningless scribble, soon to be erased by foot traffic or rain.
He mentally dismissed it, turning away from the window with a decisive, almost violent motion, his mind already shifting back to the algorithms predicting quarterly market shifts. Yet, as he settled into his ergonomic chair, the image of that brazen yellow sun flickered at the periphery of his consciousness, an unwelcome pixelated ghost in his perfectly ordered neural network. It was a sensation he hadn't accounted for, a stray thought stubbornly refusing to be cataloged and filed away. The day proceeded as planned, flawlessly executed, each task a precise cog in the colossal machine of his ambition. He optimized, he acquired, he strategized. Billions shifted at his command. Empires expanded with a mere swipe of his finger. But beneath the surface, a barely perceptible current of unease stirred. The silence of his penthouse, usually a soothing balm, felt different, tainted, perhaps, by that fleeting image of unruly, vibrant yellow. He found himself inexplicably scrolling through satellite images of the very block below his building, a habit reserved for security assessments or infrastructure planning, not for childish street art. He found no record, of course. The drawing was too new, too insignificant. He dismissed his action as an analytical quirk, a momentary lapse into curiosity about an environmental anomaly. Data collection, he rationalized, though he had no discernible use for this particular piece of data. Night fell, the city transforming into its familiar glittering grid. Alexander, usually indifferent to the passage of time, found his gaze drifting towards the window once more. The sidewalk below was an indistinguishable dark ribbon now, the sun long gone, if it had ever truly existed beyond a momentary hallucination. But the phantom ache, the silent question, seemed to resonate a little more sharply in the sudden void. He slept fitfully, his dreams uncharacteristically fragmented by flashes of brilliant yellow against gray. It was an intrusion he resented, an inefficiency of the mind. The next morning, the usual ritual unfolded. Blinds rose, coffee brewed, data streams beckoned. But this time, as Alexander approached the window, there was an almost imperceptible hesitation in his step, a subtle alteration in the trajectory of his glance. He told himself he was merely checking for any lingering evidence of the previous day's anomaly, a final confirmation of its ephemeral nature. His eyes swept down past the gleaming chrome and polished stone of his building to the sidewalk. It was clean, utterly, disappointingly clean. The sun was gone, washed away by the city's diligent sanitation crews, or perhaps the morning dew. A wave of something washed over him. It wasn't relief, as his logical mind might have predicted. It was a faint, unexpected tremor, a sense of mild disappointment, almost a flicker of indignation at the erasure. He frowned, a deeper, more pronounced line now etched between his brows. This reaction was entirely illogical. Why would he care? He hadn't cared for decades. His world was devoid of such sentimental attachments. Yet he found his gaze lingering, not on the data streams, not on the financial markets, but on that empty stretch of gray pavement where, for one fleeting moment, a child's sun had dared to shine. The silence of his penthouse, once absolute, now seemed to press in on him, heavy with an unarticulated expectation. He found himself, for the first time in memory, consciously looking out the window again that day, and then the next, not for data, but for something else he couldn't name, a silent question that had begun to whisper rather than ache. His closed loop had developed a hairline fracture, a tiny opening through which an unbidden, disruptive curiosity now dared to peek. The meticulously organized life, which had always run on rails, now felt as though a single, brightly colored pebble had been dropped onto the tracks, too small to derail it entirely, but just enough to make a faint, unsettling clatter. The hairline fracture widened, an almost imperceptible tremor in the otherwise monolithic structure of Alexander Sterling's meticulously engineered existence. That silent question, which had begun to whisper, now possessed a more insistent hum beneath the relentless whir of his digital domain. The next morning, as the city below slowly roused itself to a metallic dawn, Alexander found his gaze drawn once more to the gray pavement. There, blooming with an audacious disregard for the world's indifference, was another drawing, not a sun this time, but a curious, plump little bird with exaggerated wings and a beak shaped like a joyful, impossible grin. Its plumage was a riot of colors Alexander hadn't registered in years, an electric blue, a fiery orange, a shocking fuchsia, a palette that shrieked against the muted tones of his insulated reality. He felt an inexplicable flicker of annoyance. This was an intrusion, a deliberate defilement of the pristine emptiness he had cultivated. Yet he didn't pull away. Instead, a peculiar tension held him captive, his eyes dissecting the chalk lines with an analytical intensity usually reserved for complex market algorithms. It was crude, childish, utterly insignificant, and yet it held his attention longer than the real-time stock ticker scrolling across his nearest screen. The bird vanished, scrubbed away by the city's early rain, but another drawing appeared the following day. This time, it was a whimsical dragon, its scales a shimmering emerald, its eyes glinting with mischievous gold, exhaling puffs of white chalk smoke that seemed to drift upwards towards Alexander's eyrie.
The sheer audacity of its imagination was disarming. Alexander, a man whose life was built on cold, hard facts and quantifiable metrics, found himself momentarily bewildered by the unbridled creativity. He didn't acknowledge the slight tilt of his head, the fractional softening of his perpetually taut jawline. The daily ritual began to assert itself, an unbidden gravitational pull. His mornings, once a rigidly optimized cascade of data assimilation and strategic planning, now contained a silent, unscheduled beat. He would rise, perform his perfunctory exercises, sip his exactingly prepared coffee, and then, before allowing the digital torrent to consume him, he would approach the window. It was an almost involuntary act, a silent acknowledgement of the disruptive pebble on his tracks. He would scan the pavement, a knot forming in his stomach, an emotion he couldn't name but which felt suspiciously like anticipation, until he located the day's offering. Each piece was more elaborate, more imaginative than the last. A sprawling, starry night sky with a crescent moon winking with chalky stardust, its nebulae rendered in swirls of violet and silver that seemed to defy the coarse concrete. Then a bustling cityscape, tiny, impossibly intricate buildings, each window a miniature world, peopled by stick figures caught in various states of joyous motion. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth began to prickle beneath Alexander's Arctic reserve whenever he found a new drawing. He dismissed it as a neurological misfire, a glitch in his perfectly calibrated system. Solace was a weakness, a vulnerability he had long ago purged from his emotional repertoire. Yet the sensation persisted, a peculiar, unacknowledged comfort in the fleeting beauty, a subtle counterpoint to the unrelenting pressure of his empire. He found himself, to his own profound astonishment, not merely looking, but seeing them, analyzing the choice of color, the boldness of the line, the story each simple image told. The fragile nature of the art became another unlooked-for source of internal conflict. These ephemeral masterpieces, so vibrant and full of life, were gone within hours, victims of rain or foot traffic, their transient existence a stark contrast to the permanent, immutable structures of his own creation. He found himself developing a peculiar urgency. He started to adjust his morning schedule, subtly at first, then with increasing deliberateness. The early hours, once dedicated solely to market analysis, now had a distinct period carved out, a window of time ensuring he could witness the new artwork before it faded into non-existence. He would linger, a phantom sentinel, his coffee growing cold in his hand, a strange, almost proprietarial sense of satisfaction settling over him. It wasn't happiness, not in any conventional sense, but a quiet hum of presence, a momentary anchor in the boundless void of his wealth. The silence of his penthouse now often felt less like a fortress and more like an echo chamber, amplifying the unarticulated questions that chalk art had begun to pose. The neatly organized life, which had always run on rails, now felt as though the brightly colored pebbles weren't just on the tracks, but were subtly altering the gradient, steering him towards an unknown, utterly disorienting destination. He knew, with a certainty that unnerved him, that tomorrow he would look again. The early morning chill still clung to the city, but on the cracked, uneven expanse of sidewalk below Alexander Sterling's towering edifice, a different kind of dawn was breaking. It wasn't heralded by the first weak rays of sun, but by the determined scrape of chalk on concrete, a sound entirely lost to the insulated quiet of the penthouse, yet potent in its declaration. This was Lily's time. 8 years old, a whirlwind of boundless energy and quiet, intense focus. She moved with almost a ceremonial precision, her small hands smudged with every hue of the rainbow. Her canvas was the very path Alexander would only ever observe from afar, a vast gray expanse that to her was merely waiting for a splash of life. Today, a swirling galaxy began to bloom beneath her touch. She worked swiftly, her brow furrowed in concentration, a stray strand of dark hair escaping her braid and tickling her cheek. There was no hesitation in her strokes. Each line, each curve was infused with an unwavering certainty, as if the image already existed fully formed in her mind, merely waiting for her to coax it into being. Her worn backpack, slung carelessly nearby, spilled an assortment of brightly colored chalk sticks, some mere stubs from countless past creations, others still pristine and sharp. A half-eaten apple lay beside it, momentarily forgotten in the fever of creation. Lily wasn't just drawing, she was performing an act of pure, unadulterated magic. To her, the city wasn't a collection of cold steel and indifferent glass, but a sleeping beast, occasionally grumbling, often lonely, and desperately in need of beauty. Her art was a secret conversation with its soul, a silent whisper of joy in the endless urban drone. She believed, with an innocence so profound it bordered on revelation, that each vibrant sun, each soaring dragon, each star-dusted night sky she left on the pavement was a tiny, benevolent spell. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the fleeting, incandescent smile it might bring to a hurried passerby, the momentary reprieve it offered from the daily grind. She pictured old Mr. Henderson, whose perpetually grumpy face might soften for a second as he saw her whimsical whale swimming across his path to the bakery.
Or the young woman with tired eyes on her way to work who might pause just for a breath and feel a flicker of forgotten wonder. There was a quiet, almost fierce dedication in her belief, a conviction that if enough small moments of joy were scattered, they could collectively shift the city's heavy mood. Her life was simple, unburdened by the complexities that choked Alexander's. A small, sun-dappled apartment just a few blocks away, shared with her grandmother, Nana Rose, who understood the sacred importance of a fresh box of chalk and never questioned the compulsion to decorate the world. Mornings were for art, afternoons for school and quiet games, evenings for stories and the comforting scent of Nana Rose's cooking. There were no grand ambitions, no crushing expectations, just the pure, unvarnished joy of creation and connection, however transient. She hummed a little tune as she added a nebular cloud, her imagination a boundless sea where colors danced and stories unfolded. The cold concrete held no power over her. She knelt, oblivious to the grit and chill, lost in the intricate patterns of her burgeoning cosmos. She saw possibilities where others saw only cracked pavement, heard symphonies where others heard only traffic. A flicker of anxiety, rare and quickly dismissed, would sometimes pass through her as the city's machinery rumbled, hinting at the impermanence of her creations, but she always pushed it away, focusing on the vibrant moment, on the joy of making. A dog walker passed, offering a brief, knowing smile. A street cleaner rumbled by in the distance, a sound that usually heralded the end of her masterpieces, but for now, it was just background noise. Lily didn't notice the sleek, black car gliding silently past, nor did she sense the piercing gaze from dozens of floors above, the single pair of eyes dissecting every stroke, every splash of color. She was merely a child, utterly absorbed in her world-making, scattering stardust on a gray earth. The towering skyscraper with its reflective, unfeeling facade was just another part of the impersonal skyline, a backdrop to her vibrant universe, completely unaware of the solitary figure within, whose once monochromatic existence was slowly but inexorably being colored in, stroke by vibrant stroke, by the unsuspecting magic of her hands. The contrast was stark, yet utterly invisible to her. For Alexander, the world had shrunk to a single point of bright, vibrant focus. For Lily, her world was expanding, encompassing every speck of dust, every ray of light, every potential canvas in the boundless space around her. She finished the swirl of a distant spiral arm, then leaned back, admiring her work, a genuine, wide smile spreading across her face, completely content, completely present, utterly unaware of the invisible threads she was weaving, connecting her small, bright world to a much larger, darker one. The universe she drew on the pavement was vast, but the universe she was unknowingly creating around Alexander was even vaster and infinitely more unpredictable. The sterile hum of Alexander Sterling's penthouse had once been a comforting shroud, an assurance of his impenetrable fortress against the cacophony of the world. Now it felt like a silent pressure, a soundless vacuum into which his thoughts, once sharp and formidable, were increasingly scattering, drawn irrevocably downwards. His polished, minimalist desk, typically cluttered with projections of market trends and confidential reports, lay almost bare, his gaze frequently drifting to the expansive windows. Business strategies, intricate mergers, the volatile dance of the stock market, these titans of his former mental landscape now seemed distant, muted, almost trivial. Instead, his mind replayed the swirling cosmos Lily had painted, the defiant roar of her whimsical dragon, the intricate petals of a flower that bloomed, however briefly, on cold concrete. Who was this anonymous artist, this fleeting architect of beauty? The question, utterly unquantifiable, without a clear answer or actionable insight, gnawed at him with an unprecedented persistence. It was an intrusion, a delightful, disorienting anomaly in his rigidly structured existence, a puzzle not meant to be solved by algorithms or financial models. He found himself cataloging the drawings in his mind, noting their progression, their evolving complexity, the sheer, unadulterated joy that seemed to radiate from each chalkstroke. His initial intellectual dismissal had withered, replaced by a growing, undeniable fascination that felt dangerously close to wonder, a word he hadn't truly considered since childhood. The compulsion grew, a quiet but insistent drumbeat beneath the surface of his carefully constructed calm. He needed to see them closer. The idea was absurd, preposterous for Alexander Sterling, who communicated via encrypted messages and rarely set foot outside his controlled environments, preferring the solitude of his self-imposed empire. The outside world was a chaotic, unpredictable entity, a source of potential friction and unnecessary emotional drain. Yet the vibrant sun, the fantastical creatures, the silent promise of a new masterpiece each morning whispered a different truth, a call he found himself increasingly incapable of ignoring. The internal debate was fierce, a battle between ingrained habit and an emerging, inexplicable desire. What if someone recognizes me? What if I'm approached? The thoughts were automatic, rooted in years of guarded isolation. But what if he missed something? A detail, a nuance that only proximity could reveal.
The risk, for once, felt outweighed by the tantalizing pull of the unknown. One morning, under the guise of an early, unscheduled appointment he had no intention of keeping, Alexander found himself standing by his elevator, the polished steel reflecting a taut, unfamiliar nervousness in his eyes. He descended, floor by excruciating floor, the smooth ride a mockery of the tremor in his hands. Stepping out into the grand lobby, the doormen, usually invisible cogs in his meticulously run machine, offered deferential nods, their expressions unreadable to his self-absorbed gaze. The automated doors hissed open, unleashing a sensory assault he hadn't prepared for. The clamor of distant traffic, the crisp, cool bite of the morning air, the faint scent of exhaust mixed with damp earth and blooming city flowers. It was overwhelmingly vibrant, jarring his accustomed sterility. He walked, not towards a waiting car, but toward the edge of the sidewalk, his expensive leather shoes treading a path he hadn't taken in years. His senses, long dulled by detachment, felt raw, exposed. Every sound, every shadow, every fleeting face seemed amplified, threatening to overwhelm him. But then he saw it. A new drawing. Today, it was a magnificent, soaring hot air balloon, its basket overflowing with tiny, intricately detailed animals, a whimsical menagerie ascending towards a chalk sun. Up close, the detail was astonishing. The subtle shading that gave the balloon its spherical form, the individual expressions on the tiny animal faces, the deliberate smudge of white chalk creating the illusion of clouds. He bent slightly, a posture utterly alien to his usual commanding stance, his eyes tracing every line, every pigment. He noticed the faint scuffs where a passerby's shoe had blurred a section of the sky, the fine dust of chalk powder still clinging to the rough concrete. It was fragile, ephemeral, a breath of beauty destined to be washed away by the next rain or trampled by hurried feet. And yet, there it was, vibrant and defiant. A peculiar, almost physical ache settled in his chest, a sensation he couldn't quite name, a raw blend of appreciation and something akin to sorrow for its inevitable vanishing. He straightened, casting a quick, almost paranoid glance around. No one seemed to notice him, lost in their own morning commutes, their own urgent realities. He felt an odd lightness, a detachment from his own heavy reputation. For a few moments, he was just a man looking at a drawing. He continued his walk, his pace unhurried, unusual for him. He passed other chalk drawings further down the street, older ones, faded and indistinct, testaments to the continuous flow of this unknown artist's work. Each one was a silent monument to pure, unadulterated creation, devoid of agenda, devoid of profit motive. It was a stark counterpoint to everything he had ever built, everything he had ever valued. His usual analytical mind, always seeking patterns, data, leverage, found itself utterly at a loss. There was no metric for this joy, no return on investment for this ephemeral beauty. A flash of scarlet from a nearby rosebush caught his eye, its petals unfurling in perfect symmetry, dew glistening on its surface. He stopped, staring at it, truly seeing it for the first time, not as part of a generic urban landscape, but as an individual, living entity. The vibrant hue, the delicate texture, the intricate design. It was as complex and beautiful as any drawing, yet entirely natural, unbidden. A strange, unfamiliar warmth bloomed within him, an unbidden spark of something long dormant, almost extinguished. It was a faint echo of the unbridled curiosity of a child, a forgotten capacity for simple admiration. The world, which he had so meticulously shut out, was beginning to seep back in, not as a threat, but as an insistent, vibrant whisper. He felt a peculiar disorientation, as if the very lens through which he viewed existence was subtly, irrevocably shifting. The concrete beneath his feet, the buildings soaring overhead, the indifferent stream of humanity, they were no longer just obstacles or background noise. They were threads in a tapestry, and for the first time, Alexander Sterling felt a tentative, unsettling urge to examine the weave. He walked back, his mind not on the pressing demands of his empire, but on the delicate, defiant art on the pavement and the anonymous hand that brought such unexpected light to his shadowed world. The journey back to his penthouse, to the cold, echoing silence, felt different now. The walls, once protective, suddenly seemed a little less impenetrable, a little more like a cage, and the silence, once comforting, now carried a faint, unsettling echo of the vibrant street below. He had not engaged with anyone, had not spoken a word, yet the quiet revolution within him had begun.
The cold, echoing silence of Alexander's penthouse was indeed different now. It no longer offered the stark comfort of isolation, but instead hummed with the phantom echo of the street below, a subtle, disquieting hum that spoke of life lived, felt, and expressed, a world he had long banished. He stood by the vast expanse of reinforced glass, his gaze drawn once more to the pavement, no longer searching for an abstract splash of color, but for something more concrete, something that could tether the ethereal beauty of the drawings to the tangible world. He hadn't quite articulated what that something was, even to himself, but the need was a gnawing, unfamiliar sensation in his chest, a low thrumming that disrupted the usual calm of his carefully constructed apathy. His usual morning ritual of market analysis and strategic planning felt distant, almost trivial, an unexpected, almost jarring turn of events for a man whose life had been dictated by profit margins and market dominance. It was as if a hidden mechanism within his carefully calibrated existence had jammed, forcing a recalibration he neither understood nor entirely welcomed. The walls, once impenetrable shields, now felt translucent, barely holding back the chaotic vibrancy of the city, and the silence, once a balm, now a resonant reminder of all he had shut out. His eyes scanned the familiar stretch of sidewalk, gray and impersonal, until a small figure detached itself from the indifferent stream of pedestrians. It was a child, a flash of bright, defiant color against the muted backdrop of city life, moving with an unself-conscious grace. A worn backpack, impossibly large for her frame, bobbed with each confident step, a small box clutched in her other hand. He recognized the movement, the familiar bend, the precise, deliberate sweep of an arm that now seemed an integral part of his mornings. Lily. The name, of course, was unknown to him, but in that instant, a face, a human form became inextricably linked to the burgeoning wonder that had begun to unfurl within him. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, ran through him, not fear, nor anger, but a profound, almost primal recognition, as if a missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving had just clicked into place. This was the source. This was the hand. He watched, captivated by the small, intent figure now kneeling on the concrete canvas, oblivious to the towering edifice of wealth from which she was being observed. Her hair, a vibrant splash of chestnut, caught the pale morning light as she leaned in, her movements fluid and purposeful. He saw her unwrap a new stick of chalk, the vivid hue a stark contrast to the grit of the pavement, and begin to work. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in her hand, none of the calculating maneuvers he was accustomed to seeing in the high-stakes world of business. Each line was laid down with a conviction he hadn't seen in years, perhaps not since his own early driven days of building sterling technologies, before the joy of creation had been suffocated by the burden of expectation and the relentless pursuit of more. Her small fingers, already smudged with pastels from previous endeavors, moved with a delicate precision, tracing the nascent outline of what appeared to be a soaring bird, a phoenix perhaps, or a mythical griffin, wings already reaching for an imagined sky. From his elevated perch, Alexander felt a peculiar tension grip him, a knot tightening in his chest. It wasn't the stress of a failing deal or a looming market crash, but an almost visceral yearning, a deep, unsettling curiosity. He was an observer, a silent voyager into a world so profoundly different from his own, yet so compelling. He watched as Lily paused, not to assess her work with critical eyes, but to lift her head, a soft, uninhibited smile blooming on her face as if in response to some internal symphony. Her eyes, even from this distance, seemed to sparkle with an untamed joy, a raw, unfiltered happiness that radiated outwards, warming even the sterile air of his penthouse, a palpable energy that reached him through layers of glass and steel. It was a smile utterly devoid of artifice, a stark contrast to the polished, performative smiles he encountered in his corporate world, smiles that were often just veiled negotiation tactics. It was a smile born of pure, unadulterated creation, of a spirit utterly free, a stark, unsettling mirror to his own emotional sterility. He found himself leaning closer to the window, the cold glass, a barrier he suddenly resented, an unwelcome intermediary. He wanted to see more, to understand the source of that incandescent energy. He observed the way she pressed the chalk to the ground, the gentle scrape, audible only in his imagination, yet powerfully present in his mind, resonating with a forgotten part of him. The care she put into each delicate feather, each intricate curve of the bird's wing, spoke volumes. It wasn't just drawing,
It was an act of devotion, a pouring of her entire being into the fleeting beauty she was bringing forth, a selfless act of giving to a world that would soon erase it. Her own life, so meticulously constructed, so burdened by ownership and acquisition, felt suddenly hollow, an elaborate cage gilded with gold, while hers, lived openly on the rough, unforgiving pavement, was vibrant, alive, and profoundly real. It was an unexpected turn of thought, the irony biting him with a sharpness he hadn't anticipated. The billionaire who owned everything felt poorer than a child with a box of chalk. A subtle tremor ran through Alexander. This wasn't merely a child drawing on the sidewalk. This was a small, insistent force of nature, quietly, unknowingly, dismantling the walls he had spent decades building around his heart. Her infectious smile, her singular focus, the sheer, unbridled joy evident in each stroke, chipped away at the hardened layers of his cynicism like a relentless tiny hammer, not with force, but with a persistent gentle pressure. He saw not just an artist, but a purpose beyond profit. He saw not just a child, but a mirror reflecting back the stark barrenness of his own existence, and the image was jarring, uncomfortable, yet undeniably compelling.
The anonymous hand that had brought such unexpected light to his shadowed world now had a name, a face, and a spirit that was beginning to feel dangerously close to his own long-dormant soul, awakening sensations he had meticulously suppressed. The profound emptiness that had defined his life now had a counterpoint, a vibrant, living answer drawn in chalk, and he watched, his breath held, as the little girl continued to paint the gray world with impossible colors, unaware of the silent, seismic shift occurring within the heart of the reclusive billionaire high above. The tension mounted, not from an external threat, but from the internal struggle, the quiet battle between the man he was and the man he was slowly, agonizingly beginning to become. The view from his window had never been so clear, nor so terrifyingly illuminating. The following morning, a new spectacle began to unfold on the unforgiving expanse of the sidewalk below Alexander's window. It started, as always, with Lily, a small, vibrant splash against the monochrome urban canvas. But this time, her movements held a different kind of intensity, a focused fervor that spoke of an ambitious vision. What emerged from under her chalk-dusted fingers was not merely a drawing, but an entire world, a sprawling, fantastical garden that seemed to burst from the concrete. Mythical creatures with scales shimmering in imagined light and wings unfurled as if ready for flight, intertwined with impossibly blossoming flora, trees with leaves of sapphire, flowers that pulsed with an inner golden glow, and winding paths that promised journeys to realms unknown. Every stroke was deliberate, every color chosen with an artist's profound intuition, creating a tapestry of dreams against the mundane reality of the city street. Soon, as if drawn by an invisible current, a small crowd began to gather, mesmerized by the unfolding spectacle. They watched with hushed admiration, their faces upturned, a silent testament to the undeniable magic Lily was weaving. From his eyrie, Alexander Sterling watched, transfixed. The usual hum of his high-tech sanctuary, the omnipresent glow of his screens, faded into an irrelevant background noise. He had witnessed Lily's art grow in complexity, but this was different. This was not just a drawing, it was an invitation, a portal. An intense, almost forgotten sense of wonder flared within him, hot and unexpected, like a match struck in a cavernous darkness. It was a sensation he had long dismissed as childish fancy, a frivolous indulgence he had no time or capacity for. Yet here it was, raw and undeniable, pulling at something deep within his chest. His breath hitched as he leaned closer to the glass, his logical mind struggling to reconcile the profound emotional impact of a child's chalk drawing with the carefully constructed fortress of his detached existence. The vibrancy, the sheer unadulterated joy radiating from the piece felt like a direct assault on the carefully maintained emptiness of his world, demanding a response. An internal tremor ran through him, a terrifying yet exhilarating realization that his meticulously built walls were not merely cracking, but crumbling under the insistent, gentle force of pure, unfiltered beauty. And then, without conscious thought, a decision was made. It was not born of strategy or calculation, but of an urgent, almost desperate need to draw closer, to truly see. The notion was absurd, dangerous even. He, Alexander Sterling, the recluse, the titan who avoided human contact like a contagion, was about to descend into the bustling, unpredictable world below for a child's chalk drawing. His heart, long a quiet, methodical drum, now pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The journey from his penthouse was a descent not just in altitude, but in worlds. The polished, sterile corridors of his building felt alien. The hushed whispers of his staff a jarring intrusion. The elevator ride down was an eternity, each floor a step further into an unknown territory he had purposefully abandoned. The scent of disinfectant gave way to the faint earthy smell of rain-dampened pavement, exhaust fumes, and something else, something indefinably human. When the lobby doors slid open, revealing the vibrant chaos of the street, a wave of sensory overload crashed over him. The cacophony of distant sirens, car horns, snippets of conversations, the murmur of the crowd gathered around Lily's art, it was overwhelming, a terrifying symphony after years of silence. Yet he pushed forward, propelled by an invisible, irresistible force. His tailored suit, usually a shield of invulnerability, suddenly felt thin, exposing him to the raw gaze of the world. He moved through the periphery of the small crowd, an invisible force field of unease keeping people from getting too close, or perhaps it was just his own deeply ingrained sense of detachment. He found himself standing at the edge of the masterpiece, his gaze sweeping over the intricate details he could only glimpse from above. The fantastical creatures seemed to breathe, the flowers to unfurl. He reached out a hand, almost touching a shimmering dragon's wing, a primal instinct to connect to something real, something truly beautiful. And, at that exact moment, as if sensing his presence, or perhaps just taking a momentary pause from her fervent creation, Lily looked up. Her small, chalk-smudged face, usually alight with concentration, now held a soft, curious gaze. Her eyes, bright and innocent, met his. In that suspended breath of time, amidst the murmuring crowd and the urban clamor, a shared smile bloomed between them.
It was a smile of pure, unadulterated appreciation, a silent acknowledgement of the magic she had woven into existence and the profound, unexpected impact it had had on a soul long lost. There was no fear in her eyes, only an open, guileless connection. For Alexander, it was as if a lifetime of frozen isolation had suddenly begun to thaw, not with a gentle warmth, but with a shock of pure, electrifying recognition. The world had shifted irrevocably. The world, for Alexander, had always been a series of controlled variables, algorithms, and predictable outcomes. Human interaction, a chaotic variable he had meticulously eliminated from his equation, now stood before him in the form of a small girl with chalk-smudged cheeks and eyes that held the unfiltered clarity of a mountain spring. The shared smile, fleeting yet potent, dissolved the last vestiges of his self-imposed detachment, leaving him adrift in an unfamiliar sea of raw, unvarnished emotion. He was acutely aware of the murmuring crowd, a vague periphery of onlookers whose gazes flickered between the magnificent chalk garden and the unlikely pair at its heart. He, Alexander Sterling, the man who evaded photographers and shunned public appearances, was standing on a public sidewalk, captivated by an 8-year-old. It felt absurd, dangerous, and utterly vital. Lily's smile wavered slightly, her bright gaze dropping to the ground with a sudden, almost imperceptible sigh. "Oh no," she whispered, her voice a soft, melodic hum that broke through the city's cacophony with surprising clarity. Alexander, his attention utterly fixed on her, barely registered the sound of a small, bright, yellow piece of chalk rolling precariously close to a storm drain. It was the very piece that would have completed the wings of a miniature, shimmering pixie hovering above a dew-kissed mushroom. Without conscious thought, his arm extended, a movement so instinctive it bypassed his usual analytical filters. His fingers, accustomed to the smooth coldness of touch screens and polished metal, gently nudged the chalk back onto the pavement, preventing its descent into the grimy depths. He bent slightly, retrieving it, and offered it to her. The simple gesture felt monumental, a physical bridge built between two worlds that should never have intersected. Lily's eyes, wide with a gratitude that knew no guile, took in the chalk, then his hand, then his face again. "Thank you," she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with relief and joy. "That was my sun yellow. My pixies can't fly without their sunshine wings." She took the chalk, her small fingers brushing against his calloused ones for a fleeting second, sending an electric jolt up her arm that had nothing to do with static electricity and everything to do with connection. "It's beautiful," Alexander found himself saying, the words emerging from his throat with a slight huskiness, unpracticed and raw. He hadn't complimented anything non-transactional in years, perhaps decades. The admission felt alien and profoundly true. Lily beamed, her entire face crinkling with infectious delight. "It's supposed to make people happy," she declared, gesturing broadly at the sprawling garden. "When the city's so gray, a little bit of color makes everything feel better, don't you think? It puts smiles on faces, even grumpy ones." She paused, her innocent gaze lingering on Alexander's face, a hint of playful mischief in her eyes. "Even yours, maybe." A ghost of a smile, a sensation Alexander hadn't recognized in so long, touched his own lips. It wasn't the forced politeness of a business meeting or the cold practice smirk for the cameras. This was genuine, unexpected, a warmth spreading through his chest that felt both unnerving and profoundly comforting. "You believe your art makes people happy?" he asked, the question escaping him before he could second-guess its wisdom. He was engaging. He, Alexander Sterling, was engaging in small talk with a child on a sidewalk. It was an unprecedented breach of his self-imposed protocols. Yet an invisible force, a potent curiosity, compelled him to listen. He felt like an archaeologist uncovering a lost civilization within himself. Lily nodded vigorously, her pigtails bouncing. "Of course, see?" She pointed to an elderly woman passing by, who paused, a wistful smile gracing her lips as she gazed at the chalk dragon. She smiled. And the man with the coffee, he laughed. "My art gives them a little bit of magic for their day. It reminds them that even when things are busy and gray, there's still wonder." Her conviction was absolute, unshakable. It was a philosophy so simple, so pure, it bordered on revolutionary for Alexander, whose entire life had been built on complexity and tangible profit. He stood there, enveloped by the low hum of the city, the scent of fresh chalk and damp concrete, listening to a child articulate a truth he had long ago discarded, if he had ever known it at all. The warmth in his chest intensified, not an uncomfortable heat, but a gentle, pervasive glow that reached into corners of his being he thought had been permanently frozen. He wasn't merely observing anymore. He was absorbing, allowing her unvarnished joy and purpose to seep into his own barren landscape. It was a dialogue, however brief, that held the weight of a revelation, an unexpected twist in the carefully constructed narrative of his solitary existence. He found himself wanting to know more, wanting to understand this inexplicable force that radiated from her, capable of melting the ice around his heart. The wanting transformed, as all true needs eventually do within Alexander Sterling's world, into an almost tactical pursuit.
Not of acquisition, but of proximity. The next morning, and the morning after that, found him not merely observing from afar, but descending. His presence on the pavement became a quiet, unwavering fixture. He would stand a respectful distance away, his posture initially stiff, almost defensive, as Lily, oblivious to the monumental shift she was engineering, continued her daily ritual.
He'd watched the kaleidoscope of chalk dust bloom under her nimble fingers, the city's gray canvas erupting with dragons that breathed emerald fire, castles spun from starlight, and entire miniature worlds populated by creatures only an unburdened mind could conjure. Slowly, tentatively, his observations evolved into hushed remarks, not critiques, but almost involuntary murmurings of appreciation. "The scales on that fish, they shimmer," he might find himself saying, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly gentle. Lily, ever open, would beam, sometimes nodding, sometimes offering him a piece of chalk. On one particularly overcast day, when she was struggling to render a convincing thunderstorm, Alexander, without thinking, leaned in. "Perhaps a deeper blue for the cloud's belly," he suggested, his finger unconsciously sketching an invisible curve in the air. "And where the light breaks through, a pale yellow, like distant hope." The words surprised him as much as they surprised Lily, whose eyes widened not in fear, but in pure, unadulterated curiosity. She took his advice, and the resulting storm, vibrant and dramatic, was punctuated by a sliver of sun that seemed to hum with his unexpected suggestion. These small interactions became the threads of a new routine, intricately woven into the fabric of Alexander's once monochromatic existence. He found himself arriving earlier, lingering longer. He began to offer more than just aesthetic suggestions. He pointed out the delicate tracery of a fallen maple leaf on the grimy sidewalk, encouraging her to recreate its delicate veins, an almost forgotten wonder in his own gaze as he did so. He listened with a newfound attentiveness when she chattered about the way the light danced on the puddles after a rain, or the secret language of the sparrows perched on the lampposts. He, who had once tuned out the world with noise-canceling headphones, now found himself acutely aware of the distant peal of children's laughter echoing from the nearby park, a sound he had previously registered only as an irritating disturbance. Lily, with her unfiltered perception, showed him how the laughter wasn't just noise, but a symphony of unadulterated joy, each burst a tiny, ephemeral masterpiece. Through her eyes, Alexander began to peel back the layers of cynicism and detachment that had encrusted his soul. A crumpled candy wrapper on the ground wasn't merely litter. Lily once pointed out the way its metallic sheen caught the sun like a tiny, discarded jewel. A scuttling ant wasn't an insignificant speck, but a diligent architect, part of an unseen, intricate universe. He saw the city not as a collection of structures and transactions, but as a living, breathing entity, full of hidden textures and transient moments of beauty. The forced march of his days, once dictated by market trends and quarterly reports, now had unexpected detours. He found himself pausing to watch a cloud drift lazily across the sky, or to feel the surprising warmth of the sun on his face. Moments he would have dismissed as utterly unproductive before. His penthouse, once his sanctuary and his prison, now felt less like a terminal and more like a quiet harbor he returned to after a journey into a world he was only just beginning to truly inhabit. The chill that had perpetually settled in his chest, a constant companion of his isolation, began to recede, replaced by a peculiar, almost unsettling lightness. It was a sensation he couldn't name, a vulnerability he hadn't known existed, and an unexpected twist to a life he thought he had meticulously mapped out to its solitary end. He found himself increasingly preoccupied with the anticipation of Lily's next drawing, her next observation, her next ripple of laughter. His thoughts no longer consumed by the cold logic of profit, but the burgeoning, fragile warmth of genuine human connection. The ice wasn't just melting, it was receding, revealing a landscape he had long forgotten, or perhaps never truly known. The ice wasn't just melting, it was receding, revealing a landscape he had long forgotten, or perhaps never truly known. Days folded into weeks, each morning bringing a fresh canvas to the sidewalk and a quiet understanding between the unlikely pair.
Alexander found himself anticipating the moment he would join Lily, observing her meticulous process, the way her small fingers gripped the chalk, the intense focus in her eyes as she brought a universe to life on the gray concrete. He'd occasionally offer a small observation, a suggestion for a cloud shape or a dragon scale, and she would consider it with a serious nod, sometimes incorporating his idea, sometimes politely asserting her own artistic vision. These were moments of pure, unadulterated presence, a luxury he hadn't afforded himself in decades. His interactions with Lily, though brief, anchored his days, providing a ballast against the previously untethered weight of his wealth. The world, once a distant hum, had begun to acquire texture, sound, and a fragile, burgeoning warmth that settled in the space where the chill used to be.
He even found himself smiling, a genuine, unbidden curve of his lips at the sight of her boundless energy, a stark and vibrant contrast to his carefully cultivated stillness. This fragile, precious routine, however, was about to face an unexpected and brutal challenge. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Alexander descended from his penthouse, a newly familiar spring in his step, he noticed a flurry of official-looking flyers being taped to lampposts and storefront windows along the street. Their stark white contrasted sharply with the vibrant remnants of Lily's latest creation, a soaring, multicolored hot air balloon drifting over a fantastical cityscape. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach as he approached one, his sharp eyes quickly deciphering the bold headlines. The City Council, in an effort to enhance urban aesthetics and promote civic cleanliness, was launching a new beautification and sidewalk renewal initiative. His gaze skimmed down the text, a cold dread seeping in with each sterile, bureaucratic phrase. All unauthorized markings, graffiti, and temporary artistic expressions on public sidewalks will be subject to thorough power washing and removal commencing next Monday to ensure a pristine and uniform urban environment for all citizens. The words hit him like a physical blow. Unauthorized markings, temporary artistic expressions. They were talking about Lily's art. They were talking about the very magic that had slowly, painstakingly brought him back to life. He felt a sudden, unfamiliar surge of anger, sharp and incandescent, that replaced the peaceful hum in his chest. Later that afternoon, Lily arrived, her usual buoyant energy deflated. Her small shoulders slumped, her bright eyes clouded with a sorrow so profound it instantly eclipsed his own nascent fury. She clutched a crumpled flyer in her hand, the same one he had read, its crisp edges now softened by repeated nervous handling. "They're going to wash it all away, Alexander," she whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with unshed tears. "All the suns and the dragons and the starry nights. They're going to take away all the magic." Her lower lip trembled, and a single tear traced a path down her chalk-smudged cheek. Alexander felt a wrenching sensation in his chest, something akin to a physical pain. This was not the detached analysis he applied to business threats, not the calculated risk assessment. This was raw, untamed protectiveness, a fierce, primal instinct he hadn't known he possessed. He looked at her small, heartbroken face, at the visible tremor in her hands, and saw not just a child's disappointment, but a pure, innocent spirit about to be crushed by the indifferent machinery of the world. The thought of her joy being extinguished, of her vibrant canvases reduced to nothing more than sterile gray concrete, ignited a fire within him. He had spent a lifetime building an empire, protecting his assets, his legacy, his impenetrable solitude. But this felt different, more vital. This was about protecting a fragile spark of hope, a nascent connection that had brought color back into his monochromatic existence. He wanted to shield her from this callous decree, to somehow halt the relentless march of the power washers. The notion, absurd in its simplicity, was also terrifying in its scope. He, Alexander Sterling, the man who avoided human interaction,
was contemplating a fight against bureaucracy, against the very systems he usually manipulated from a distance, all for a little girl's chalk drawings? The tension in the air was palpable, a silent promise of an impending battle that Alexander had not sought, but suddenly found himself unequivocally ready to wage. The ice within him might have melted, but in its place a bedrock of fierce protective warmth had formed, solid and unyielding. The silence between them, heavy with unspoken fear, crackled with the latent energy of a life on the precipice of an unexpected, profound change. The abrupt silence after Lily's tearful explanation had been deafening, a vacuum quickly filled with a whirlwind in Alexander's mind. His days of distant observation and detached calculation were over. The ice had shattered, not just melting, but unleashing a torrent of indignation and purpose. He hadn't slept. Instead, pacing his penthouse, the city lights reflecting his frantic energy. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, his top legal team received an unprecedented early morning summons. They arrived, bleary-eyed and bewildered, to find Alexander not in his usual impeccably tailored suit behind a mahogany desk, but standing by the window, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold beside him, his gaze fixed on the sidewalk below. He didn't speak of mergers or acquisitions, but of art, of joy, of a little girl's simple right to express herself. His voice, usually modulated and precise, carried an unfamiliar edge, a raw, impassioned plea for justice, for beauty. His lawyers, accustomed to battles fought with cold logic and corporate might, exchanged confused glances, but the intensity in Alexander's eyes was undeniable. This wasn't about profit. It was about principle, about protecting something fragile and irreplaceable. He directed them to research every city ordinance, every loophole, every possible avenue to challenge the beautification initiative, not with the goal of winning a business dispute, but of preserving a living, breathing canvas. Every resource he'd stated, his voice resonating with an authority they'd never heard, is to be directed towards this, immediately.
The unexpected turn was not just his involvement, but the sheer, almost irrational fervor with which he pursued it. Later that same day, an even more astonishing sight unfolded on the very sidewalk where Lily had created her vibrant world. Alexander Sterling, the elusive billionaire, was no longer merely observing from above. He was there, kneeling beside Lily, a stark contrast in his bespoke attire against her bright, paint-splattered clothes. He had arrived not with a phalanx of bodyguards, but with a stack of meticulously printed forms and a handful of pens. Lily, initially awestruck, then tearfully grateful, watched as Alexander, with a surprising gentleness, explained his plan. They would create a petition, a testament to the community's desire for the art to remain. He wasn't just directing, he was collaborating. Together they sketched out a bold header: "Preserve our sidewalk symphony." Below it, Alexander drafted a concise, powerful statement, blending legal precision with Lily's heartfelt message about bringing joy to the city. "We need signatures, Lily," he explained, his gaze sweeping over the burgeoning lunchtime crowd. "Every person who believes in the magic you create, we're going to make sure they hear us." The community's reaction was a fascinating tapestry of responses. Some passers-by, recognizing the notorious Alexander Sterling, approached with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, assuming a PR stunt. Others, seeing Lily's crestfallen face and the earnest billionaire beside her, felt a pang of sympathy. An elderly woman, who had often paused to admire Lily's dragons, was the first to sign, her hand trembling slightly as she offered a warm smile to both Alexander and Lily. A young barista from the coffee shop across the street, who had secretly admired Lily's daily creations, quickly added his name, offering to display a copy of the petition in his window. But there was also resistance, an unexpected turn from a local business owner who complained about visual clutter and defacing public property, shouting criticisms that stung Lily deeply.
Alexander, however, met the negativity with a calm, unwavering resolve, addressing each concern with logic and an unexpected, almost gentle persuasion, defending Lily's art not as graffiti, but as a vital, unifying force. He even found himself engaging in spirited debates with skeptical pedestrians, arguments he would have dismissed with a wave of his hand mere weeks ago. The tension was palpable, a microcosm of the larger battle to come, played out on a gray concrete stage. He wasn't just a donor or a benefactor. He was an advocate, his hands stained with chalk dust as he helped Lily press copies of the petition into the hands of strangers, his voice growing hoarse from explaining their cause. He felt a visceral connection to the sidewalk, to the people, to Lily's hope, a connection that pulsed with an energy far more potent than any boardroom victory he had ever known. The fight had only just begun, and Alexander, for the first time in his life, felt truly alive in its midst, a sensation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The battle for art spilled from the sidewalks into the austere halls of the city council, where whispers turned into a powerful roar. Alexander, no longer a detached magnate, but a man reborn in the fire of struggle, stood beside Lily, her small hand gripping his tightly. He presented the petitions, his voice now steady, filled with the very passion he had once despised. The community, inspired by Lily's bright spirit and Alexander's unwavering support, spoke of art as the soul of the city. The council, resistant at first, yielded not only to logic, but to the undeniable joy radiating from the crowd. In an unexpected turn of events, the initiative to scrub the sidewalks was not only stopped, but a new proposal emerged: the creation of an official corner of creativity, a public space dedicated to spontaneous street art. The once empty penthouse of Alexander now seemed distant. His true home was on the colorful streets, among the people. He founded a fund not for profit, but for the nurturing of creativity, sponsoring local artists and ensuring that children like Lily would always have endless chalk and canvases. He held workshops, his hands, once skilled only with keyboards, now joyfully stained with paint. Lily, his first and most beloved protégé, continued to color the city with dreams, her laughter echoing like a bright melody through Alexander's transformed life. He had not merely saved art, he had rediscovered himself, his purpose drawn in bold, joyful strokes. If this story of finding joy and meaning through unexpected connections touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe for more moving stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support fuels our creative journey.